Ethan Blake was the kind of man who didn't just walk into a room, he owned it. At 37, he was a senior operations manager at one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the country. Sharp suits, expensive watches, and an air of superiority followed him wherever he went. He had earned his reputation as a perfectionist, but not everyone admired him. In fact, most of his employees dreaded his presence. His words could cut sharper than a blade, and his expectations were often impossible to meet. That morning, Ethan was heading to San Francisco for an urgent business meeting that could determine the future of his department. His team had been preparing the pitch for weeks, and although his name would be on the top of the presentation, most of the hard work had been done by someone else, Clara Thompson, his recently promoted regional director. Clara was efficient, calm under pressure, and one of the few people who dared to question Ethan's decisions. And for that reason alone, Ethan didn't like her much. He'd been especially hard on her these last few weeks. He'd criticized her emails, torn apart her reports, and even dismissed her suggestions in front of the board. She had remained composed through it all, never raising her voice, never showing anger. To Ethan, that quiet strength was almost irritating, as if she was silently proving she was better than him. That morning, Clara was supposed to be on the same flight, but due to some unexpected scheduling issue, Ethan was told she'd join them later in San Francisco. That suited him just fine. He preferred to travel alone in peace without anyone from the office asking him questions or making small talk. When he arrived at the airport, his assistant had already arranged a first-class ticket. Ethan strolled through the terminal with his leather briefcase in hand, his tailored navy suit pressed perfectly, and his phone glued to his ear as he barked last-minute instructions to his team. "Tell the client I'll be there by 3, and make sure the projections are updated." "I don't want excuses," he said, his tone cold and commanding. He ended the call, checked his watch, and walked toward the gate. The attendant scanned his ticket and smiled politely. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Blake." He nodded curtly, not bothering to return the smile. He wasn't unkind by nature, just efficient. That's what he told himself, at least. Once seated in first class, he loosened his tie and opened his laptop. He didn't even glance at the people around him. For him, airplanes were just mobile offices with wings. A few minutes later, the cabin door closed, and the safety demonstration began. Ethan didn't pay attention. He'd flown hundreds of times. He kept typing, his mind on profit margins and deadlines, completely unaware that this flight was about to teach him one of the biggest lessons of his life. As the plane took off, Ethan felt the familiar push against his seat, the hum of the engines filling the cabin. He adjusted his laptop on the tray table and ordered a black coffee from the flight attendant passing by. Without looking up, he muttered, "Make it quick, please." The flight attendant paused for a brief second but said nothing. When she returned, she set the cup down gently beside him. "Here you go, sir," she said in a calm, professional tone. Ethan finally looked up and froze. The woman standing before him was Clara Thompson. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. She was dressed in a crisp navy uniform, her hair neatly tied back, a polite smile on her face. But her eyes, calm, intelligent, and unflinching, were unmistakable. "Clara?" he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blake," she replied evenly, as if greeting a regular passenger. "Would you like sugar with your coffee?" Ethan blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. What the hell is going on? What are you doing dressed like? Flight attendant. She finished, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Just doing my job, sir." He stared at her, speechless. Around them, other passengers were settling in, unaware of the tension brewing in row 2. Ethan's mind raced. Was this some kind of prank? A joke by HR? Or worse, was he being tested somehow? Clara, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. She moved down the aisle, assisting other passengers with the same calm professionalism she'd always shown in the office. Ethan tried to focus on his laptop, but his thoughts were a mess. Why is she here? Did she quit? Was she fired? He remembered the sharp tone he'd used with her the previous week. He'd told her she lacked initiative and that her leadership wasn't up to corporate standards. Now, here she was, serving him coffee at 30,000 feet. The irony stung. About 20 minutes later, Clara passed by again. Ethan couldn't help himself. "Clara, I need to talk to you," he said quietly. She looked at him for a moment. Of course, Mr. Blake, but please fasten your seatbelt. We're expecting a little turbulence. Her voice was polite, but there was an edge to it, a subtle reminder of who was actually in control of the situation. As the plane began to shake lightly, Clara held the overhead rail effortlessly, checking on passengers while Ethan gripped his armrest. He hated turbulence, and she seemed to notice. "Don't worry, sir," she said softly, leaning slightly toward him. "It's just a few bumps. You'll be fine." There was no mockery in her tone, just quiet reassurance. But to Ethan, it felt strange, humiliating even, to have the woman he'd been criticizing all month comforting him. When the turbulence passed, she smiled faintly and moved on. Ethan sat back, staring at her as she worked. Everything about her demeanor was the same: composed, confident, focused. Whether she was in a corporate boardroom or a plane cabin, she carried herself with grace and authority. And that's when it hit him. She didn't belong below him. Maybe she never did. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit it. About halfway through the flight, he saw her standing near the galley, talking with another crew member. The other attendant seemed to admire her, listening closely, nodding as Clara spoke. It was the same thing he'd noticed in the office. People naturally respected her. When she returned to check on first class, Ethan tried again. "Clara, can we talk privately?" She gave a professional smile. "This isn't the best place, Mr. Blake, but if you have a request, I'm happy to help." "I'm serious," he said, lowering his voice. "I need to understand what's happening." Clara hesitated, then leaned closer. "Let's just say this flight is part of something bigger, Mr. Blake. You'll understand when we land." Her words sent a chill through him. "Part of something bigger?" Before he could press further, the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing that lunch would be served shortly. Clara straightened up and walked away. Ethan sat there, more confused than ever. The next 2 hours dragged. He watched her serve meals, assist passengers, even comfort a crying child in economy class. She did it all with a patience and warmth he'd never seen in the office. He began to notice the small things. How she crouched to meet people at eye level. How she smiled genuinely. How her calm presence seemed to make everyone around her relax. It was strange, and he'd worked with her for 2 years and never noticed these qualities before. Maybe because he never looked. By the time the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Ethan's mind was spinning. He'd started this flight feeling in control, but now he felt unsettled. For the first time in a long while, he was questioning himself. As the wheels touched down, he decided he needed answers, immediately. When the seatbelt sign went off, he stood up and waited near the exit. Clara was there, thanking passengers as they disembarked. When Ethan approached, she smiled politely again. "Thank you for flying with us, Mr. Blake. Hope you had a pleasant flight." "Cut the act, Clara," he said under his breath. "I need to know what this was all about." Her smile didn't fade. "Meet me in the terminal lounge in 20 minutes, she whispered. "There's something you need to see." Then she turned to greet the next passenger, leaving Ethan standing there completely bewildered. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out, his mind racing faster than ever. 20 minutes later, he stood in the airport lounge, scanning the crowd. And then he saw her, no uniform this time. Clara was back in her professional attire, every bit the poised executive he knew. "Sit down," she said calmly, motioning to a table. "It's time we talked." Ethan sat, still confused. "You have some explaining to do." "I know," she said with a faint smile. "And you're going to get it. But first, let me ask you something, Ethan. How did it feel?" "How did what feel?" he asked. "To be served by someone you see as beneath you." He froze, caught off guard by her directness. "I don't—" "Yes, you do," she interrupted softly. "You treat people like they exist to meet your standards, not like they're human beings. I've seen it with your team, your assistants, even your clients. You don't listen, you dictate. You don't lead, you command." Her tone wasn't angry and just honest. That somehow made it worse. Ethan stared at her, struggling to respond. "So this was, what, some kind of lesson?" Clara nodded. "Exactly. A lesson at 30,000 feet. The company partnered with a corporate empathy program. Senior executives were asked to participate, to experience humility firsthand. You were one of the chosen candidates. Only you weren't told in advance," he blinked. "Wait, you planned this?" "Yes," she said simply. "I volunteered to oversee your session." I wanted you to see what it's like when someone in service gives their best, without arrogance, without expecting credit. I wanted you to understand that leadership isn't about hierarchy, it's about humanity. Ethan sat in stunned silence. Around them, people bustled through the lounge, oblivious to the conversation unfolding between a humbled executive and his quietly powerful boss. Clara continued, her voice steady. You're brilliant, Ethan. No one doubts that. But brilliance without empathy isn't leadership. It's control, and control only gets you so far. Her words hit him harder than he expected. For once, he didn't argue. He didn't deflect. He just sat there, realizing that somewhere between his ambition and his success, he'd lost sight of what truly mattered. Finally, he looked at her. I think I understand now. Clara smiled gently. Good. Because this was only the first step. Ethan Blake walked through the bustling terminal, his briefcase swinging loosely in his hand, feeling an unfamiliar weight on his shoulders. He had spent the first part of the flight in shock, trying to process what had just happened, and now, every step he took toward the terminal lounge seemed heavier than the last. The airport around him felt like a blur, people rushing past with suitcases, the distant echo of announcements, the rolling of carts, the hum of conversation. All of it faded into a background noise as his mind replayed Clara's calm, unwavering gaze and the realization that she had orchestrated the entire flight experience just to teach him a lesson. He couldn't deny that the sting of humility was unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, but at the same time it forced him to reflect in ways he hadn't in years. He remembered every critique he had ever delivered to his team, every impatient word spoken during meetings, every harsh judgment he had passed off as efficiency, and for the first time, he felt the weight of how those words must have landed. When he finally reached the lounge, Clara was already seated at a corner table, her posture straight, her hands folded on the table, eyes calm yet piercing. She gestured for him to sit across from her, and he obeyed, feeling the awkwardness of being on the receiving end of authority, not corporate, but moral and human authority, which somehow felt heavier. For a long moment neither spoke, and the silence was thick, filled with unspoken truths. Ethan opened his mouth, intending to argue, to dismiss, to reclaim some semblance of control, but no words came. Clara, in her quiet, steady way, filled the silence herself. Ethan, she began softly, do you know why I agreed to do this? To serve you on that flight? To orchestrate this little exercise in humility? Ethan swallowed hard, trying to meet her gaze, and nodded slowly, unsure whether he should admit ignorance or arrogance. Because I wanted you to see something, she continued. You're brilliant, but brilliance without empathy is hollow. You've spent your career climbing, commanding, directing. But how often have you really led with understanding? How often have you stepped into the shoes of those you expect to follow you, and seen the world through their eyes? Ethan's mind flashed back to the flight, the way she had moved down the aisle with quiet confidence, helping passengers without expectation, correcting mistakes without embarrassment, and calming a frightened child with nothing but patience and a smile. He realized almost painfully how natural she was at all of it, how the respect she commanded had nothing to do with titles, and everything to do with presence, grace, and competence. He wanted to argue, to assert that business was business and that empathy had little to do with results, but her eyes held him in a way he had never experienced with anyone before. He had tried to intimidate, to dominate, to assert superiority in boardrooms, offices, and meetings, yet here she was, without any power other than skill and integrity, and he felt exposed in a way that was uncomfortable but awakening. Clara leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. I wanted you to feel what it's like to be served, to have someone who is competent, skilled, and unflinching in authority, yet entirely committed to making your experience better, without seeking your approval or gratitude. That's leadership, Ethan. The kind that earns respect naturally, not through fear or position. Ethan nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat, feeling an unusual combination of embarrassment and admiration. He had always prided himself on being a perfectionist, on holding people to exacting standards, but he now realized how often his focus on results had blinded him to the human aspect of leadership. The lesson she had orchestrated was uncomfortable, yes, but it was clear, undeniable, and unforgettable. Clara continued, her tone unwavering. This is not punishment. This is reflection. You have the talent to lead, But talent alone does not create loyalty or admiration. It does not inspire people to give their best willingly. Authority without empathy is a cage. Empathy without skill is empty. The balance between the two is what separates a good leader from a truly remarkable one. Ethan felt a wave of introspection he hadn't allowed himself in years. He remembered the young analyst in his department who had resigned suddenly last month, leaving a terse email about feeling undervalued, a sharp contrast to the glowing recommendation she had previously received. He remembered his assistant who had cried quietly in the office bathroom after being yelled at for a minor scheduling mistake. He remembered the heated boardroom debates where he dismissed suggestions without consideration, believing speed and efficiency trumped collaboration. And he realized that, through the lens Clara had forced him to see, he had created an environment of tension and fear, even though he had thought of himself as a competent and respected leader. His pride was bruised but not destroyed. Instead, it was being reshaped, challenged, and tempered by an unexpected teacher who had deliberately placed him in a position of humility. I see it now, he admitted finally, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't realize how much my behavior affected everyone. Clara allowed a faint smile. Awareness is the first step, Ethan. Recognition of one's own flaws doesn't make you weak. It makes you ready for growth. Leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room or the one with the most authority. It's about empowering others to achieve what they didn't think possible, while guiding them with integrity and patience. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to absorb her words, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the stirrings of genuine humility. He had spent decades building a career around efficiency, results, and control. But here, on a plane and now in a quiet lounge, he was beginning to understand that leadership without humanity was incomplete. So the flight, he said slowly, was an exercise? Clara nodded. Yes, a simulation in empathy and humility. You were chosen because of your influence and because of the impact you could have if you learned this lesson. You weren't informed because the surprise element ensures genuine reflection. You can't simulate humility if you already know it's coming. You have to experience it unexpectedly, naturally, and fully. Ethan exhaled slowly. It felt like the weight he had carried for years. The unchallenged superiority, the sense of unshakable control, was beginning to lift, replaced by a cautious understanding that true leadership required more than knowledge or skill. He realized how rare it was to find someone like Clara, who could wield authority, demonstrate skill, and maintain composure in any situation, yet remain entirely human, patient, and kind. For her, every action on that flight had been deliberate, measured yet seemingly effortless, and it had cut through his defenses more effectively than any critique or reprimand ever could. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability, a rare glimpse of honesty in a man used to hiding behind confidence and control. Clara leaned back, her gaze steady. You don't need to say anything yet. Actions will speak louder than words. Reflection will speak louder than excuses. But the real test begins now. Not in a plane cabin, not in a lounge, but back at the office, in every interaction, every decision, every moment where you have influence. This is where the lesson becomes real. Ethan's mind was spinning, realizing that what he had thought was an isolated experience was actually the beginning of a transformation he hadn't anticipated. He had spent years measuring success in profits, deals closed, and metrics achieved, but now he had to measure success in human terms, in respect earned, morale uplifted, and empathy demonstrated. He felt a mix of fear, uncertainty, and excitement. Fear of confronting the reality of his past actions, uncertainty about whether he could truly change, and excitement at the possibility of becoming the kind of leader who inspired rather than intimidated. For the next hour they talked quietly, Clara guiding him through reflections on past interactions, pointing out subtle moments where empathy could have altered outcomes, highlighting instances where understanding had been overlooked. She spoke with patience, never condescending, always precise, turning every criticism into a learning opportunity. Ethan absorbed it all, sometimes flinching, sometimes nodding, but always listening. By the time their conversation ended, he felt as though he had aged decades in wisdom, not in years, and he understood that this experience would stay with him far longer than any business deal ever could. As they left the lounge and walked toward the exit, he glanced at Clara, feeling a strange mix of gratitude, respect, and newfound humility. He realized that the lesson at 30,000 feet was only the beginning, and that his journey toward becoming a truly empathetic leader had just begun. And it was a journey he was now determined to see through, no matter how uncomfortable, challenging, or transformative it might be. Ethan Blake returned to the office the next morning with a weight on his shoulders that was simultaneously heavy and strangely liberating. He walked through the familiar glass doors of the skyscraper that housed his firm, expecting the usual morning greetings, the hurried conversations about metrics, deadlines, and meetings, yet everything felt different. The world he had dominated for so long now seemed slightly alien. His employees, accustomed to his commanding presence, glanced at him with cautious curiosity, sensing a subtle change in the energy he exuded. He didn't immediately know how to act, how to bridge the chasm between the old version of himself, who demanded, criticized, and controlled, and this new version, one forced into humility by an unexpected lesson at 30,000 feet. As he passed by the cubicles, he caught snippets of conversations, laughter, and the faint clatter of keyboards, all of which reminded him that these were real people, with real lives, not just cogs in the machine he had so long ruled. Sitting at his desk, he opened his emails and paused, realizing for the first time that he could approach them differently, not with curt demands and sharp reprimands, but with understanding, patience, and guidance. He recalled Clara's words on the flight, about empathy, leadership, and humanity, and felt the truth of them pressing down on him. He knew that simply acknowledging the lesson in thought was insufficient. He had to act, and act consistently, to demonstrate a genuine shift in his approach. His first real challenge came quickly, an email from a junior analyst who had submitted a report with a minor error. In the past, Ethan would have unleashed a scathing critique, pointing out mistakes publicly, perhaps even questioning the competence of the analyst in front of peers. This time he paused. He drafted a response, carefully choosing words that acknowledged the effort put into the report, highlighting what had been done well, and suggesting corrections in a supportive, constructive manner. Hitting send, he felt a strange mix of anxiety and pride. He wondered if his team would notice the change, if they would trust it as genuine, or if it would be dismissed as a temporary experiment. Moments later, he received a response from the analyst, a note of gratitude, surprisingly warm and human. Ethan realized that the positive reinforcement and acknowledgement of effort, rather than harsh criticism, created engagement instead of fear. It was a revelation he hadn't anticipated, and it energized him to continue experimenting with this new approach. Later that morning, Clara herself appeared at the office not as a flight attendant but in her professional capacity, exuding authority and calm confidence. She walked past his desk, giving a small, knowing nod, and Ethan felt a silent acknowledgement pass between them, a recognition that the lesson had begun to take root, that his journey toward authentic leadership was underway. The day proceeded with a series of interactions that tested his resolve. A heated meeting with department heads required him to moderate discussions, ensuring every voice was heard, every concern acknowledged. Instead of dominating the conversation as he would have in the past, Ethan consciously listened, asked thoughtful questions, and encouraged collaboration. It was exhausting in a new way, requiring self-discipline, patience, and emotional intelligence, but by the end of the meeting, he noticed the difference. Nods of understanding, relieved smiles, and even a subtle respect from colleagues who had previously bristled at his assertiveness. This small victory reinforced the lesson from the flight. Leadership was not a matter of asserting superiority, but facilitating growth and cohesion among those you led. By afternoon, he encountered another test. A client called with last-minute changes to a project, a situation that would have previously triggered frustration, snapped orders, and a flurry of emails demanding immediate compliance. This time, Ethan paused, visualizing Clara moving calmly down the aisle of the plane, serving coffee with composed authority while maintaining empathy for every passenger. He mirrored her calmness in his tone, asking questions to fully understand the client's needs, offering solutions rather than commands, and maintaining composure even when the timeline was tight. The client's response was immediate and positive, appreciative of the thoughtful approach. Ethan noted the stark contrast. Previously, similar situations would have caused stress, tension, and resentment. Now the outcome was smoother, more collaborative, and productive. It dawned on him that this was the tangible, measurable impact of the lesson he had learned. Humility and empathy did not weaken leadership. They enhanced it. As the day progressed, Ethan reflected further, recalling every moment of the flight. Clara's composed stance in the aisle, her gentle guidance during turbulence, the way she addressed passengers with patience and dignity, and how she had subtly yet profoundly turned him into a reflective observer of his own behavior. Each memory served as a model, a blueprint for the leadership he aspired to embody. By evening, he found himself reviewing reports, preparing for tomorrow's meetings, and consciously applying the principles of respectful engagement, constructive feedback, and empathetic leadership. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, an understanding that success was no longer measured solely in numbers or completed projects, but in the way his team felt, collaborated, and grew under his guidance. As he prepared to leave the office, he paused, glancing at the skyline through the glass walls. The city bathed in the warm glow of sunset, and realized that the lesson was not confined to the office. It was life itself, understanding, patience, humility, and authentic connection with others. Later that night at home, Ethan sat in his living room reviewing notes he had jotted down about interactions, moments of reflection, and areas for improvement. He considered reaching out to Clara to discuss strategies for continued growth, mentorship, and feedback. Understanding that the journey toward authentic leadership required guidance from someone who exemplified it naturally, the thought of her brought a smile. Not a smug or arrogant one, but a genuine acknowledgement of respect and gratitude for the lesson she had orchestrated so subtly yet profoundly. In the quiet of his apartment, Ethan contemplated the transformations unfolding within him. He realized that humility was not a weakness, empathy was not a compromise, and leadership was not a display of power but a practice of humanity. Each interaction that day, each reflection, each deliberate action to prioritize understanding over control had reinforced the lesson, and he knew the path ahead would be long, challenging, and sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately rewarding. Over the next few days, Ethan noticed subtle shifts in the office environment. His team members were more engaged, collaborative, and willing to contribute ideas without fear of reprimand. Meetings ran more smoothly, projects progressed more efficiently, and even the previously tense atmosphere softened, replaced by a cautious optimism that Ethan realized he had helped cultivate. The transformation was not immediate or dramatic, but it was genuine and sustainable, a reflection of the principles Clara had impressed upon him during that fateful flight. One afternoon, he found himself mentoring a junior manager, guiding her through a complex project with patience, encouragement, and constructive feedback, observing her growth and confidence blossom under supportive leadership. It was a profound contrast to the methods he had employed in the past, and he felt a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction he had never experienced in his career. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan began to internalize the lessons more deeply. He reflected on every interaction, consciously applying empathy and humility, and observed the ripple effect throughout the office. Productivity improved, morale soared, and respect for him as a leader evolved from fear and authority to genuine admiration and trust. It was a transformation not only for his team but also for himself, a personal evolution catalyzed by a single, unexpected experience at 30,000 feet. The memory of Clara serving coffee in the aisle, calm and composed yet silently commanding authority, remained vivid in his mind. It became a touchstone, a reminder of the power of humility and empathy, and a guiding principle for the way he chose to lead. One evening, after a long day, Ethan returned home reflecting on the lessons, challenges, and growth he had experienced. He realized that the journey was ongoing, that leadership was a continuous practice of listening, understanding, and guiding with integrity and humanity. The flight, the lounge conversation, and the deliberate orchestration of humility had been the catalyst, but the true transformation required daily commitment, reflection, and action. And for the first time in years, Ethan Blake felt not only capable but inspired to lead with empathy, humility, and authenticity, recognizing that true success was measured not by authority or accolades, but by the positive impact one had on the lives of those entrusted to one's leadership. The lesson at 30,000 feet had become a turning point, a defining moment in a life and career once defined by control and precision. now reshaped by reflection, compassion, and an understanding of the profound power of leading with heart as well as mind. Ethan Blake's journey of transformation continued in ways he had not anticipated, each day revealing new challenges and opportunities to apply the lessons he had learned from Clara. The office, once a battlefield of tension and rigid hierarchy, now felt like a canvas where he could experiment with empathy, patience, and authentic leadership. That morning began with an unexpected situation, a client visit that had been rescheduled to an earlier time, leaving Ethan barely enough time to prepare. In the past, he would have panicked, issuing orders to his team, barking instructions, and treating the change as an imposition. But today, he paused, taking a deep breath, reminding himself of the lessons learned at 30,000 feet, the power of composure, observation, and empathy. He called his team together not with sharp commands but with calm guidance. "Team, the client has moved the meeting up. Let's review the key points together. Ensure everyone is aligned and support each other as we prepare," he said. His tone was measured, collaborative, and respectful. The subtle difference in approach immediately changed the energy in the room. Colleagues exchanged glances of relief, some smiling, recognizing the genuine support and engagement in his words. The meeting prep went smoothly, with team members volunteering ideas and feedback freely, no longer hesitant or fearful of harsh criticism. Ethan marveled at the difference. The engagement, creativity, and commitment were far beyond what he had experienced before in similar situations. As the client arrived, Ethan noticed something remarkable. His team members were confident, poised, and fully prepared, reflecting both their own capabilities and the environment he had begun fostering. The client's interaction was seamless, productive, and professional, with Ethan acting as a facilitator rather than a dictator. He guided discussions, asked thoughtful questions, and encouraged collaboration, ensuring every voice was heard and valued. By the end of the meeting, the client praised not only the quality of the work, but also the evident cohesion and professionalism of the team. Ethan felt a quiet pride, not of superiority but of authentic leadership, the pride of seeing people thrive under guidance rather than fear. Returning to his office after the client left, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. The memory of Clara in the airplane aisle, calm, composed, and commanding authority without arrogance, remained vivid. He realized that her lesson had been more than a one-time exercise. It was a blueprint for sustainable leadership, a combination of humility, empathy, competence, and strategic authority. Later that afternoon, an internal challenge arose, a conflict between two senior associates who had clashed over project priorities. Previously, Ethan might have imposed a decision, asserting his authority and expecting compliance. Today, he approached the situation differently. He called both associates into a quiet meeting room and asked them to explain their perspectives, listening carefully, asking clarifying questions, and summarizing their points to ensure understanding. He guided the conversation, encouraging compromise and collaboration, and allowed each person to feel heard and respected. By the end of the discussion, both associates had agreed on a revised strategy, appreciating Ethan's balanced approach and thoughtful mediation. He realized once again that humility and empathy did not weaken authority. They strengthened it, building trust, loyalty, and respect among colleagues. The impact of these new approaches extended beyond formal interactions. Walking through the office hallways, Ethan observed small but significant changes. Team members smiled more, conversations were warmer, and collaboration was more fluid. He even noticed the intern, previously nervous and withdrawn, now contributing ideas confidently during a brainstorming session. Each moment reinforced the realization that leadership was less about commanding and more about cultivating an environment where people felt empowered to excel. That evening, Ethan stayed late reviewing upcoming projects and reflecting on the transformation underway. He considered reaching out to Clara for feedback, acknowledging that her guidance had been instrumental and that continued mentorship could help him maintain and expand the lessons learned. He drafted an email, carefully choosing words of gratitude and a request for advice, mindful of expressing respect without seeking undue attention. As he pressed send, he felt a sense of accountability and humility, a recognition that growth required both action and reflection. Over the next several days, he implemented small but deliberate changes, offering praise when deserved, listening before making decisions, checking in on employees' well-being, and recognizing contributions publicly. These actions, seemingly minor, had profound effects on office morale, productivity, and overall atmosphere. Colleagues who had once viewed him with caution now looked to him for guidance and support, appreciating the balance between authority and empathy he had begun to embody. One particularly challenging situation tested Ethan's resolve: a high-stakes presentation for a prospective client who was notorious for being demanding and critical. In the past, such an event would have triggered stress, rigidity, and micromanagement. This time, however, Ethan approached preparation differently. He held collaborative sessions with his team, encouraged brainstorming, delegated responsibilities according to individual strengths, and emphasized the importance of communication, support, and confidence. On the day of the presentation, he remained composed, guided discussions thoughtfully, and allowed team members to take the lead in presenting their areas of expertise. The client was impressed not only by the content but also by the cohesion, professionalism, and confidence displayed by the team, a direct reflection of Ethan's transformation in leadership style. After the presentation, his team gathered in the conference room, beaming with pride. Ethan took a moment to acknowledge their efforts, praising individual contributions and expressing genuine gratitude. The shift from criticism to recognition, from control to guidance, created a profound sense of belonging and motivation among his colleagues. In the following weeks, Ethan continued to reflect, analyze, and adapt. He maintained a journal of interactions, noting successes, areas for improvement, and moments where empathy had influenced outcomes positively. He reviewed past decisions, considering how they might have been handled differently with insight gained from Clara's lesson. Through deliberate practice, observation, and reflection, he gradually internalized the principles of empathetic leadership. Personal relationships, too, began to change. Ethan noticed that friends, family, and acquaintances responded differently to his newfound approach. Conversations were more meaningful, conflicts were resolved more peacefully, and connections deepened. He realized that the lessons of humility, patience, and empathy were not confined to the office. They were universal, applicable to every interaction in life. One evening, as he prepared for a long flight back home, Ethan reflected on the journey he had undertaken since that fateful flight. He remembered the initial shock of seeing Clara in uniform, the embarrassment and humility it induced, the quiet conversation in the lounge that reshaped his perspective, and the deliberate application of the lessons in the office and in life. Each step had been a building block, gradually transforming his understanding of leadership, influence, and humanity. Boarding the plane, he felt a sense of anticipation and curiosity, a desire to continue learning, growing, and applying the principles that had reshaped him. He knew that leadership was an ongoing practice, a continuous journey of reflection, action, and improvement. As the engines roared to life and the plane ascended into the sky, Ethan looked out the window, the city shrinking below him, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Clara, for the experience that had challenged him, for the opportunity to grow, and for the realization that true leadership was not about dominance or fear, but about empathy, humility, and authentic connection. The lesson at 30,000 feet had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited a transformation he had not anticipated, but now, fully aware of its impact, he embraced it with intention, commitment, and an eagerness to continue the journey. He understood that the true measure of success was no longer in accolades, metrics, or authority, but in the positive influence, respect, and growth he could foster in others. And as the plane soared through the clouds, Ethan Blake felt not only humbled but inspired, ready to lead with compassion, wisdom, and authenticity, knowing that the path ahead would be challenging but ultimately rewarding, and that the lessons learned from a single flight would resonate throughout his life, career, and relationships for years to come. Ethan Blake had come a long way since that unforgettable flight, where Clara had, with quiet precision, orchestrated a lesson in humility, empathy, and authentic leadership. As the weeks turned into months, he realized that the transformation was not an event, but a process, one that demanded continual reflection, patience, and conscious application of the principles that had reshaped his professional and personal life. Every morning, he walked into the office with a heightened awareness of the impact of his words, actions, and decisions on others, constantly asking himself how he could foster collaboration, respect, and trust among his team. The atmosphere in the office had shifted palpably. Where there had once been tension, apprehension, and the quiet fear of criticism, there was now engagement, enthusiasm, and a sense of shared purpose. Meetings flowed smoothly, ideas were exchanged freely, and employees felt empowered to take initiative, knowing that their efforts would be acknowledged and valued. Ethan found himself thriving in this environment in a way he had never anticipated. The satisfaction was no longer about asserting dominance or hitting targets at all costs. It was about seeing his team succeed, grow, and exceed expectations, and realizing that their success was a reflection of the leadership he was learning to embody. One day, a particularly challenging situation arose. A major client had requested an urgent revision of a project that would require several team members to work overtime. Previously, Ethan would have reacted with frustration, issuing orders and pressuring his team to comply without question. But this time, he approached the problem differently. He called a quick team meeting, explaining the client's needs, asking for input on feasible strategies, and encouraging everyone to voice concerns and suggestions. The collaborative approach sparked creative solutions he might never have considered alone, and by delegating responsibilities according to each member's strengths, the team not only met the client's expectations but did so efficiently and with morale intact. The client's praise was immediate and effusive, highlighting the professionalism, cohesion, and expertise displayed by the team. Ethan felt a surge of pride that was deeper and more meaningful than any recognition he had received before. It was the pride of authentic leadership, pride rooted in empathy, collaboration, and empowerment. Beyond the office, Ethan noticed a profound shift in how he approached personal relationships. Family gatherings, friendships, and casual interactions were imbued with more patience, understanding, and genuine interest. He listened more attentively, offered support without judgment, and navigated conflicts with a newfound sense of perspective. The lessons from Clara's orchestrated flight experience had transcended professional boundaries, reshaping his approach to human connection in every aspect of his life. One evening, after an intense but productive day, Ethan received a message from Clara requesting a meeting over dinner. Curious and eager, he agreed, sensing that the journey of mentorship and reflection was not yet complete. At the restaurant, Clara greeted him warmly, dressed professionally yet casually, her presence exuding calm authority and subtle grace. Over dinner, they discussed his progress, the challenges he had faced, and the areas where he was still growing. Clara offered insight not as criticism but as guidance, highlighting moments where his application of empathy had been strong and pointing out opportunities for further refinement. Ethan listened intently, appreciating the balance of encouragement and constructive feedback. The conversation reinforced his understanding that leadership was a continuous journey, one that required humility, openness, and a willingness to learn from those who embodied the qualities he aspired to integrate fully into his life. As the evening progressed, Clara shared stories of her own challenges, moments of doubt, and instances where she had learned through experience the importance of empathy and humility. Ethan realized that her effectiveness as a leader was not innate, but cultivated through years of deliberate practice, reflection, and conscious effort. The very qualities she had sought to instill in him through the carefully orchestrated flight experience. The dinner concluded with a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect and understanding. Ethan felt gratitude not only for Clara's mentorship, but also for the opportunity to embark on a path of personal and professional growth that would influence every aspect of his life. Returning to his apartment that night, Ethan reflected on the journey from the first moment of shock aboard the airplane to the present. He recalled the initial embarrassment and humility, the quiet conversation in the lounge, the deliberate application of lessons in the office, and the tangible improvements in team dynamics, productivity, and morale. Each memory reinforced the transformative power of experiential learning, empathy, and authentic leadership. Over the subsequent weeks, Ethan continued to embed these principles into his daily routine. He established regular check-ins with team members, encouraged open communication, recognized achievements publicly, and provided support during challenges. His approach to conflict shifted from immediate correction and dominance to thoughtful mediation and understanding, fostering a culture of trust and collaboration that extended throughout the department. The cumulative effect was profound. Not only did productivity increase, but employee satisfaction, creativity, and engagement soared. Ethan began to receive unsolicited feedback from colleagues expressing appreciation for the supportive environment, the encouragement to innovate, and the recognition of their efforts, feedback he had rarely received in the past. With each positive outcome, Ethan's confidence in the principles he had learned grew, reinforcing the lessons that Clara had imparted through both the flight experience and ongoing mentorship. Beyond professional success, Ethan noticed personal growth in his emotional intelligence, patience, and empathy. He approached challenges with a measured mindset, reflecting before reacting, and sought to understand perspectives before making judgments. The transformation was subtle yet profound, affecting not only how he interacted with others but also how he perceived himself and his role as a leader and human being. Months later, the company held its annual leadership retreat, a gathering of executives, managers, and key team members. Ethan was invited to present a case study on leadership practices and team engagement. He approached the task with a mindset shaped by his experiences, emphasizing the importance of empathy, humility, collaboration, and authentic leadership. His presentation was met with admiration, sparking discussions, questions, and reflections among peers who had long regarded him as a high-performing but rigid leader. The impact was evident. His journey inspired others to consider how they could integrate similar principles into their own leadership practices. After the retreat, Ethan returned to the office with renewed energy and commitment. He continued to mentor his team, guide projects with empathy and clarity, and reinforce a culture of collaboration, recognition, and growth. The lessons from Clara had become integral to his leadership style, not as a temporary experiment but as a permanent foundation for personal and professional conduct. One afternoon, as he observed his team working seamlessly on a complex project, he realized how far he had come. The office that once felt tense and intimidating now radiated energy, creativity, and mutual respect. The relationships he had cultivated were strong, trust was evident, and the collective achievements reflected a cohesive, empowered team. In that moment, Ethan understood that the flight, the lesson, and the ongoing mentorship had fundamentally reshaped not only his approach to leadership, but his understanding of success itself. It was no longer measured solely by achievements, metrics, or accolades, but by the positive influence he could have on others' growth, confidence, and fulfillment. The lesson at 30,000 feet had proven enduring, powerful, and life-altering. Ethan reflected on the irony. A flight that had begun as an ordinary journey had become the catalyst for extraordinary personal and professional transformation. The memory of Clara's calm authority, patient guidance, and unwavering competence remained a touchstone for him, reminding him that leadership was an ongoing practice, a continuous journey of learning, reflection, and intentional action. As the sun set over the city skyline, Ethan Blake sat at his desk, reviewing the day's accomplishments and planning for the future. He felt a profound sense of gratitude not for success alone, but for the lessons, guidance, and opportunities that had enabled him to grow into a leader who led with both skill and humanity. The journey that began at 30,000 feet had come full circle, leaving him wiser, more empathetic, and committed to fostering environments where people could thrive. He understood that the true impact of the lesson would continue to unfold in every decision, interaction, and challenge he faced, shaping not only his career, but his life. And as he looked forward, he embraced the ongoing responsibility of leading with humility, empathy, and authenticity, fully aware that the most meaningful legacy a leader could leave was not authority or accolades, but the empowerment, growth, and fulfillment of those they led. In the quiet of his office, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, acknowledging the journey, the transformation, and the mentor who had guided him. He knew the path ahead would include challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but he felt equipped, grounded, and inspired. The experience at 30,000 feet, the intentional lesson in humility, and the subsequent application of its principles had permanently reshaped him. Ethan Blake was no longer just a high-performing executive. He was a leader who understood the power of empathy, the value of humility, and the importance of authentic connection. A leader whose influence extended beyond results, creating lasting impact in the lives of those around him. And as he closed his laptop for the evening, the city lights twinkling outside his window, he felt a deep, satisfying certainty that the lessons learned at 30,000 feet would continue to guide him, not just in his career, but in every interaction, every decision, and every relationship for the rest of his life.